Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Now this afternoon I'm looking at an excellent new book which has come to us from Oxford University Press. It's only just been published and I found it quite interesting. The title of the book is Contract Governance and it's got a subtitle, Dimensions in Law and Research. It's an interesting book. I've always found the law of contract fascinating. It's one of the main cornerstones of the common law, of course, and it's an area that is very interesting. We do have this dratted word governance coming in everywhere at the moment. That's by and by. I think it's a little fad with all these other things like entities and so forth, but we do know what they're actually referring to because it's looking overall at the subject matter. Now, this book has been edited by Stefan Grundmann, Florian Moslein and Karl Risenhuber. And we'll have a look at the book in a minute. Let me just explain that Elizabeth and I talked about this book. We didn't find it the easiest book to read initially, till I understood a little bit more about what they were referring to. So we gave it, as the title of our review, our appreciation of this book, Contract Governance, Wide-Ranging Discussion and Fresh Thinking on this important area of law. And I'll tell you what we say about the book. Let's have a look at it first. It's a hardback. You can see nice, interesting, very modern picture on the front. It's Still Life with Gas Lamp, 1915, by Paul Klee. That's the actual title of the picture. Now, the inside dust cover, other publications from OUP in this area, and we've then got just a short little statement about what this book is aiming at the front. Now, the front of the book is there. We'll go through the front first, and you've then got some detail there of the table of contents. You can see that running all the way through. There are 6 parts, and there are 14 chapters in total, and there are the names of the people who've been involved in producing the actual chapters are listed. There's a table of abbreviations because there are a lot of abbreviations, and you can see, and then we get into the list of people, and there are a lot of people involved. It's too difficult for me to go through all of them, but there are many people you'll probably see and know. Some of them you'll probably know quite well. So there's been a huge amount of erudition in the production of this work, which is to be expected. OUP produce excellent books, and this is no exception at all. Part 1, the overall architecture of contract governance. Now, in English, that means the overall architecture, it's the structure of how we regulate and look after our contracts. Now, introduction overview, I'm sorry, that's a simple way of doing it, but the language can be a bit po-faced from time to time. However, they make a good point, so I'm not going to be critical. The book introduces and develops contract governance as a new approach to contract theory. So there you have it. Wonder what Chitty on Contracts would make of it. Now, there are some interesting footnotes which go all the way through. There are some useful figures and diagrams. There are no paragraph numbering. There is a certain amount of subtitling, which is quite helpful. Then we get to the back of the book, which runs to under 500 pages. The index is by page numbering, which is quite helpful. Then you do, as I say, have a lot of footnoting. There's no detailed bibliography because it's actually contained in the actual chapters themselves and the footnotes at the bottom. That's the book. An interesting one. Anybody, as I say, interested in contract, which is, as I say, the cornerstone of our common law, will, I think, find this book of interest. I think jurisprudentially it's interesting to see the direction in which we're going in this century with the way we conduct contracts, the type of contracts, the information technology aspects have changed things and so on. So where are we going at the moment in dimensions of law and research with this subject? Well, this is what we say. If you are perpetually confused by the shifting meanings and connotations of the word governance, not to mention contract governance, this book will certainly enlighten you, particularly if you're a corporate lawyer. It's been recently published, as I've said, by Oxford University Press, and it's a book which points to a multi-disciplinary approach to governance, aided by the analysis and insight of some 40 learned contributors, including legal scholars and the more than occasional economist and sociologist. Case in point is the essay by Professor Per Zumbanson of Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto, which places governance within regulatory theory, which is basically where I come from, I think, on that, noting that it is arguably the new paradigm in administrative sciences, a view substantiated in any number of recent research papers on the subject. And similar views are actually expressed by Professor Zumbanson and are found in the Oxford Handbook on Governance, which is also published by OUP a couple of years ago in 2012. The aim which drives then much of the discussion in this book is to point the way toward the motivational forces behind not only legal but also wider decision making. Quoting from current scholarship, the three editors define governance, that's specifically contract governance, as, quote, the institutional matrix within which transactions are negotiated and executed. The issue of the levels of regulation is at the heart of governance in general and of contract governance in particular. Well, I hope that helps you, because that quote in itself, it has some words, the institutional matrix, which transactions are negotiated and executed, in the issue of the levels of regulation. See, the word is sort of going around the barn a little bit, if I may say so. However, I think you get the general drift, which gets me back to Professor Zumbanson, what I said before about governance being a regulatory theory, which I probably think is what it is. As the analytical key then to the full range of contracts, long-term, short-term and so forth, contract governance, say the editors, stands for a holistic, comprehensive, i.e. multidisciplinary and international approach, which is what this book aims to illustrate. The range of essays it contains touch on everything from law, legal practice and economics to sociology, psychology and other behavioural sciences. And part 2 of the book, for example, examines contract governance problems in herd behaviour. The introductory article under this category is purely sociological and strays into criminology as well. Well, there's no surprise there. Advancing such theory as the contagious aspects of crime, as well as obesity and happiness, and who knew? That's the question there. Note also the article on moral hazard and herd behaviour in the financial crisis. Now let me conclude by saying I hope you haven't taken this the wrong way with this review. I did find it fascinating, but some of the words make me wonder about what they're really getting at. I have to be blunt about it, but I think I've understood. So what I say is this: other areas which are discussed here include governance of networks of contracts and long-term contractual relationships, all of which will be familiar to you in your basic understanding of the principles and elements of the law of contract. Also note the overview pertaining to commercial and company law as it affects contracts, and the article on public-private collaboration, which has of course been around now for a few years, a couple of decades. Now, as an academic discipline then, governance research is certainly multifaceted, and the value of this book, which does cite an enormous amount of research, you can see from the footnotes, is that as a discipline it should be explored from a number of differing standpoints, engendering much debate, perhaps even controversy, which is all to the good. So as a work of scholarship, we think this book makes an important contribution to further study and analysis within what is a really important area of law, and it's a great credit, I think, to the current OUP titles that they've got this on board, because it's such an, as I say, the law of contract itself is such an important area that we're looking at really basic structures, I dare say models, for where we're going. The publication date is cited at 2015. Let's just have one last look at the book. It's quite a heavy book actually, nice book. A hardback, spine, and nothing on the back. And then of course, as I say, you've got on a dust cover inside, you've got a little bit of information there. Very useful index, which I found helpful at the back. It's not overdone, but you can find things quite quickly. I was quite taken by some of the more theoretical aspects of this as well. Legal supervision of commercial opportunism. Again, you see you've got a lot of words here, but you've got some useful case law, which I found, again, quite interesting, which is referred to. Not actually by way of indexing, but you do have the cases, again, mentioned, and the articles referred to, mentioned in the footnotes themselves. Contract uncertainty, certainty and innovation, another very interesting chapter area from those who've contributed. All in all, an interesting book, and as I've said, it's not directly going to affect your practice if you deal with contracts as a lawyer. But I think what it does do is it offers a fresh approach as to where we might be going with the overall approach to what is now called contract governance. It's an area I hadn't actually thought of in quite the same way until I saw this book. So it's given me a fresh idea for views for the future. Thank you then to the editors, the contributors and to OUP for an excellent contribution to what is a developing argument in this area. Thanks. Bye-bye.